Hi guys, today we're going to be reading chapters 4 and 5 of Book the Third. So we're going to start with chapter 4, obviously. Chapter 4, Calm in the Storm. Dr. Manette did not return until the morning of the 4th day of his absence. So much of what had happened in that dreadful time as could be kept from the knowledge of Lucy was so well concealed from her that not until long afterwards, when France and she were far apart, did she know that 1,100 defenseless prisoners of both sexes and all ages had been killed by the populace. That 4 days and nights had been darkened by this deed of horror, and that the air around her had been tainted by the slain. She only knew that there had been attack upon the prisons, that all political prisoners had been in danger, and that some had been dragged out by the crowd and murdered. To Mr. Lorry, the doctor communicated under injunction of secrecy, on which he had no need to dwell, that the crowd had taken him through a scene of carnage to the prison of La Force, that in the prison he had found a self-appointed tribunal sitting, before which the prisoners were brought singly, and by which they were rapidly ordered to be put forth to be massacred, or to be released, or, in a few cases, to be sent back to their cells. That, presented by his conductors to this tribunal, he had announced himself by name and profession as having been for 18 years a secret and unaccused prisoner in the Bastille; that one of the body so sitting in judgment had risen and identified him, and that this man was Defarge. So here, in this first bit of chapter 4, we find out that Dr. Manette's been gone for 4 days, and during that 4 days, thousands of people have been murdered. He ends up in the prison of La Force to find a tribunal, which is basically a court that is unofficial, but its findings are very official, and they are just bringing in prisoner after prisoner after prisoner and convicting them and sentencing them to death. That hereupon he had ascertained through the registers on the table, and that his son-in-law was among the living prisoners, and had pleaded hard to be to the tribunal, of whom some members were asleep and some awake, some dirty with murder and some clean, some sober and some not, for his life and liberty. And stopping again. It's important that we note here that the members of the tribunal are not upstanding citizens. They are not, they're not taking this very seriously as far as making certain that they weed out the guilty from the innocent. What we find out is that some of them are asleep, some are awake, some are dirty with murder, meaning they are covered in blood of people who they have murdered the night before. Some are clean, some are sober, but some of them are drunk. And this is a pretty, I don't think that anybody would want the jury who is trying to find you guilty or innocent to be asleep, dirty with murder, bloody, or drunk. So picking it back up with that in the first frantic greetings lavished on himself as a notable sufferer under the overthrown system, it had been accorded to him to have Charles Darnay brought before the lawless court and examined, that he seemed on the point of being at once released when the tide in his favor met with some unexplained check, not intelligible to the doctor, which led to a few words of secret conference. So Dr. Manette is pleading with the tribunal to let Charles Darnay go. He thinks that he's gonna get him released, and then something happens to stop that. That the man sitting as president had then informed Dr. Manette that the prisoner must remain in custody, but should, for his sake, be held inviolate in safe custody. That immediately on a signal the prisoner was removed to the interior of the prison again, but that he, the doctor, had then so strongly pleaded for permission to remain and assure himself that his son-in-law was, through no malice or mischance, delivered to the concourse whose murderous yells outside the gate had often drowned the proceedings, that he had obtained the permission and had remained in that hall of blood until the danger was over. So Charles is not going to be allowed out, but he is going to be allowed to be moved into a safer cell so that the crowds of murderers can't get to him. So picking it up with the sights he had seen there, with brief snatches of food and sleep by intervals, shall remain untold. The mad joy over the prisoners who were saved had astounded him scarcely less than the mad ferocity against those who were cut to pieces. One prisoner there was, he said, who had been discharged into the street free, but at whom a mistaken savage had thrust a pike as he passed out. Being besought to go to him and dress the wound, the doctor had passed out at the same gate, and had found him in the arms of a company of Samaritans, who were seated on the bodies of their victims. With an inconsistency as monstrous as anything in this awful nightmare, they had helped the healer and tended the wounded man with the gentlest solicitude, had made a litter for him and escorted him carefully from the spot, had then caught up their weapons and plunged anew into a butchery so dreadful that the doctor had covered his eyes with his hands and swooned away in the midst of it. So here we find that the people of France it's just kind of insane. They let a prisoner go. They find him innocent. They let him go. And as he's walking out, somebody in the crowd stabs him. Well, then another group of good Samaritans take him aside, literally sitting on the bodies of the people that they themselves had murdered to help this guy. So there's no real consistency here. All right, picking it up with As Mr. Lorry. As Mr. Lorry received these confidences, and as he watched the face of his friend, now 62 years of age, a misgiving arose within him that such dread experiences would revive the old danger. But he had never seen his friend. But he had never seen his friend in his present aspect. He had never at all known him in his present character. For the first time the doctor felt now that his suffering was strength and power. For the first time he felt that in that sharp fire he had slowly forged the iron which could break the prison door of his daughter's husband and deliver him. It all tended to a good end, my friend. It was not mere waste and ruin. As my beloved child was helpful in restoring me to myself, I will be helpful now in restoring the dearest part of herself to her. By the aid of heaven I will do it. Thus Dr. Manette. And when Jarvis Lorry saw that the kindled eyes, the resolute face, the calm, strong look and bearing of the man whose life always seemed to him to have been stopped like a clock for so many years and then set going again with an energy which had lain dormant during the cessation of its usefulness, he believed. Greater things than the doctor had at that time to contend with would have yielded before his persevering purpose. While he kept himself in place as a physician whose business was with all degrees of mankind, bonded and free, rich and poor, bad and good, he used his personal influence so wisely that he was soon the inspecting physician of 3 prisons, and among them of La Force. He could now assure Lucy that her husband was no longer confined alone, but was mixed with the general body of prisoners. He saw her husband weekly, and brought sweet messages to her, straight from his lips. Sometimes her husband himself sent a letter to her, though never by the doctor's hand, but she was not permitted to write to him. For, among the many wild suspicions of plots in the prison, the wildest of all pointed at immigrants who were known to have made friends or permanent connections abroad. This new life of the doctor's was an anxious life, no doubt. Still, the sagacious Mr. Lorry saw that there was a new sustaining pride in it. Nothing unbecoming tinged with pride. It was natural and worthy one. But he observed it as a curiosity. The doctor knew that up to that time his imprisonment had been associated, in the minds of his daughter and his friend, with his personal affliction, deprivation, and weakness. Now that this was changed, and he knew himself to be invested through that old trial with forces to which they both looked for Charles' ultimate safety and deliverance, he became so far exalted by the change that he took the lead and direction, and required them as the weak to trust him as the strong. The preceding relative positions of himself and Lucy were reversed, yet only as the liveliest gratitude and affection could reverse them. For he could have had no pride but in rendering some service to her who had rendered so much to him. All curious to see, thought Mr. Lorry in his amiably shrewd way. But all natural and right. So take the lead, my dear friend, and keep it. It couldn't be in better hands. Okay, so pause. So what we find out here is that Dr. Manette is returned to life once again. He has, even as good as he had gotten while living in London in the past 20 years or so, he was still subdued by his imprisonment. He still had that shadow of the Bastille over him. But now his position as a prisoner in the Bastille, that terrible timing, that terrible time, it leads him to a place of strength in revolutionary France. It leads him to a place of an exalted place in the society. And it's that terrible time in prison that really makes it so that he can actually save Charles, or have a chance at saving Charles.